Saturday has always been a big deal in my life. I mean, I've always set aside Saturdays as family days in my schedule. First for my husband and son, then for my son and his family. It's a tradition that's never been up for discussion, a commitment that can't be broken. Now I look at my phone and don't know how to feel. Pierce canceled our meeting again. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm swamped at work. Some problems with insurance payments. The boss wants a report by Monday. Maybe next Saturday? His voice sounds tense, as if he's making up an excuse on the fly. Of course, son. I understand, I reply in an even voice, unable to detect any disappointment even to myself. Perhaps because disappointment has been replaced by habit. Noel, my husband, sits in his worn armchair in front of the TV. His fingers, twisted by arthritis, slowly turn the pages of the newspaper. He doesn't even look up when I put down the phone. Canceled again? He asks, even though he knows the answer. Yes, work? Of course, Noel grunts, and we both know there's nothing more to say. Our little house on the outskirts of Birmingham is gradually aging along with us. I look at the walls that have long needed a fresh coat of paint, at the kitchen table with its tarnished surface, at the clock we bought 30 years ago. Everything is the same as before, but everything has changed imperceptibly. My name is Muriel Farnsdale. I am 74 years old, and I have spent most of my life working as an electronics engineer at Hartwell Systems, an electronics factory. I retired 9 years ago, but I still remember the smell of soldering flux, the sound of the machines starting up, and the feeling when a circuit you've been struggling with for weeks finally starts to work. What are we doing today? Noel asks without looking up from the newspaper. The same as always when Pierce cancels. I'll work in the garden and you watch your shows. Noel nods as if it's the most logical answer. He is 76, and in recent years, arthritis has severely limited his mobility. He used to be an excellent mechanic. His hands could fix any engine, but now they can barely hold a cup of tea. But he doesn't complain. He never has. I go to the kitchen and start making tea, mechanically taking out the cups and brewing the leaves in the teapot my mother gave us for our wedding 50 years ago. Looking out the window at our small garden, I think about how everything has changed. When Pierce was little, I worked as an engineer on the day shift, came home, made dinner, checked his homework, and read to him at night. I remember explaining to him how the radio worked, how electricity flowed through wires, how to assemble a simple electrical circuit. He would sit there with his eyes wide open, hanging on my every word. Back then, I thought he would follow in my footsteps. But Pierce chose a more prestigious profession, as he put it. He started working for an insurance company. Now he's a middle manager with a good salary and an office overlooking the city center. Noel comes into the kitchen leaning on his cane. I pour him some tea and add a spoonful of sugar, just the way he likes it. Thinking about the past again? He asks, looking at me intently. Just remembering how Pierce loved it when I explained how things worked to him. That was before he met Lorna, Noel remarks, and we both fall silent. Lorna, my sister-in-law for 20 years, a dental clinic administrator, always impeccably dressed, with perfect manicures and icy politeness. From the beginning, she looked at me as if I were something outdated that should be tolerated out of courtesy. I remember how she grimaced when I talked about my job at family dinners. Muriel, let's not talk about circuits and wires at the table. As if my profession was something dirty, unworthy of mention in polite company. After we got married, Pierce started to change. At first, it was little things. He called less often, canceled plans at the last minute, and blamed work more and more. Then came the grandchildren, Aaron and Quentin. I was so happy when they were born. I thought I would be needed again. I would sit with them, tell them stories, teach them everything I knew. But Lorna had other ideas. Thank you, Muriel, but we have a nanny, she said with a polite smile. Besides, children need a routine, and at your age, it would be hard for you. At my age, I was just over 50 at the time and managed an entire department at a factory, but for some reason, I was considered too old to sit with my own grandchildren. I take a sip of tea and look at my hands. They are not as nimble as they used to be, but they are still strong. The hands of an engineer, accustomed to precision and meticulous work. Once upon a time, these hands assembled circuits that controlled complex equipment. Now they dig in the garden and dust photographs of people who avoid me. You know, Noel says, interrupting my thoughts, I think they're just different. A new generation, different values. They just think we're a burden, I reply. Old people who talk about the past all the time and don't understand the present. Maybe, he agrees. But I remember my father saying the same thing about me. I smile. Noel always knew how to find the good in any situation. Even when it became clear that our son had chosen his wife's side over his parents, he accepted it with philosophical calm. That's the way the world is, Muriel. We don't raise children for ourselves. But accepting it doesn't mean you don't feel the pain. And today, on yet another canceled Saturday, the pain is particularly acute. I get up and start washing the cups. Noel goes back to the living room, to his chair and the TV. This is how we spend most of our days, each in our own corner of the house, each with our own thoughts. Occasionally, we exchange a few words, but often we just sit together in silence. After 50 years of marriage, we have learned to understand each other without words. In the evening, I call Erin. She is currently studying business management at university. I want to hear her voice, ask how she is, maybe offer to help her with her studies. Hi, Grandma, she answers after the fifth ring. I can hear music and voices in the background. I'm a little busy right now. Can I call you back later? Of course, dear. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Everything's fine. Listen, my friends are here. I really can't talk. Bye. And she hangs up. I know she won't call back. She never does. Quentin is even worse. At 16, he is completely immersed in the world of gadgets and social media. Once, in his early childhood, he loved to sit on my lap while I told him about the stars and planets, about electricity and magnets. Now he barely looks up from his phone when we meet at rare family dinners. Hi, he mumbles. How are you? He doesn't listen to my answer, his fingers already sliding across the screen, typing messages to his friends. Sometimes I think they don't even know who I am. To them, I'm just an old woman who shows up at family gatherings sometimes. They don't know that I was one of the first female engineers at an electronics factory in Birmingham, that I designed circuits for equipment that is still used in industry today, that I was respected by my male colleagues at a time when there were very few women in technical professions. They don't know that I designed and built Pierce's first computer when he was a teenager, how I sat up nights soldering circuits and tweaking parts so I could give him something none of his friends had for his 16th birthday, how his eyes lit up when he turned it on for the first time and saw the blinking cursor on the screen. Now he works in an office where computers are considered obsolete after 2 years, where technology changes so fast that no one thinks about how it works, where no one appreciates the painstaking work of the engineers who made it all possible. I go back to the living room and sit down next to Noel. He's watching a documentary about World War II. Another Saturday without a family dinner. You know, I say, remember that engineer Malcolm I worked with in the 80s? He invited us to a reunion of former factory employees. Maybe we should go? Noel looks at me in surprise. You never liked those kinds of events. Maybe it's time to start. He nods thoughtfully. Maybe. When is it? Next Saturday? But we're having dinner with Pierce and his family, Noel reminds me. I shrug. He'll cancel anyway. He always does. Noel doesn't argue. He knows I'm right. That night, I lie in bed and think about my life, about how I always tried to be a good mother, a good wife, a good engineer, how I tried to do everything, work, home, raising my son, how proud I was of my achievements and of having made it in a male-dominated profession. And where am I now? In a small house on the outskirts of Birmingham, with a husband who is immersed in his own world of pain and memories, with a son who finds any excuse not to see us, with grandchildren who barely know us. The phone rings just as I'm about to fall asleep. It's Pierce. Mom, I've been thinking about next Saturday. Maybe we should get together after all. Lorna wants to bake her famous pie. I'm silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what's happened. Why the sudden change? You said you were busy at work. Yes, but I thought I could make some time. Family is more important. Family is more important. How often I've heard him say that, and how rarely I've seen it in action. I don't know, Pierce. Noel and I already have plans for next Saturday. Now he is silent. I can almost see the surprise on his face. Noel and I never have plans. We are always available, always waiting for them to visit or call. What plans? He finally asks. I'm meeting some of my former coworkers from the factory. I haven't seen many of them in years. It'll be interesting to see how they're doing. Oh, he sounds a little disappointed. I see. Well, maybe another time. Maybe, I reply. Good night, Pierce. I hang up and feel a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in a long time, I've turned him down. For the first time in a long time, I've put my own desires above his convenience. Noel turns toward me in bed. What did he want? He asked if we could meet up next Saturday. I told him we had plans. Noel smiles in the darkness. So we're going to meet your coworkers? Yes, I say. I think it'll be good for both of us to get out of the house. I agree, he says, and I hear a warmth in his voice that I haven't heard in a long time. Maybe this is the beginning of something new. Maybe it's time to stop waiting to be called and start living our own lives. Maybe it's time to admit that to our son and his family, we're just an obligation, a box to check off the list that can be put off if something more important comes up. I fall asleep with that thought, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel bitter, just determination. In the morning, the phone rings. It's Pierce again. Mom, could you reschedule your meeting with your colleagues? Aaron really wants to see you next Saturday. I smile, knowing it's not true. Aaron doesn't think about us for weeks at a time. I'm sorry, son. I already confirmed that we'd be there. Maybe in 2 weeks? Okay, he says with a sigh. In 2 weeks. When I hang up, Noah looks at me with surprise. What's wrong with you today? I don't know, I answer honestly. I'm just tired of being useless. Saturday morning greeted us with a gray Birmingham sky and drizzling rain that tapped monotonously and drearily on the roof. It was the usual weather for our town, which usually kept Noel and me at home, wrapped in blankets and warming ourselves with cups of hot tea. But today, something had changed. Perhaps it was yesterday's disappointment at yet another canceled family dinner. Or maybe it was just the accumulated fatigue of being cooped up inside. Let's go out today, I suggested to Noel, who was sitting in his armchair with the newspaper as usual. We can go for a walk, stop by a cafe, maybe check out the bookstore. Noel looked at me skeptically over his glasses. In this weather? Why would we do that? There's a documentary about World War II submarines on TV today. I sighed. In recent years, Noel had become increasingly housebound. His arthritis was getting worse, and every trip out of the house was a small ordeal for him. But I felt that if we didn't start fighting this isolation now, we would soon turn into two old people living from program to program, from pill to pill. I baked those cinnamon rolls you like, I said, knowing it was a dirty trick. We can take them with us and have a snack in the park if the rain stops. Noel rubbed his knee thoughtfully, a sure sign that it was bothering him more than usual today. I don't know, Muriel. It's damp, and you know how that affects my joints. I know, I replied softly, sitting down on the arm of his chair. But I also know that Dr. Kemble said movement helps. Even a short walk is better than sitting in a chair all day. Noel grunted, but I could see he was wavering. Besides, I added, we could stop by that electronics store you mentioned. Look at the new radios. It was another dirty trick. Despite his age, Noel had retained a keen interest in technology. He had been an excellent mechanic in his youth, and after retiring, he had taken up amateur radio. Our attic was filled with boxes of parts and tools. Well, if you insist, he finally gave in, folding up the newspaper. But if the rain gets worse, we're coming right back. I smiled, feeling unexpectedly excited. What could be so special about a simple trip to town? But for us, it was almost an adventure after weeks spent within four walls. We spent a long time getting ready. Noel carefully chose his clothes, checked the weather forecast, and took his medication for joint pain. I packed buns in a container, prepared a thermos of hot tea, and checked that we hadn't forgotten our umbrellas and medicines. Finally, around noon, we got into our old Toyota, which was already 15 years old, but still served us well thanks to Noel's care. Where to first? Noel asked, turning on the windshield wipers, which squeaked as they swept the raindrops off the windshield. Let's start downtown, I suggested. We can walk along the waterfront if the rain lets up, or go to the mall if it doesn't. He nodded and carefully backed out of the driveway. Noel's movements behind the wheel were slow and cautious, but confident. He had always been a good driver. We hardly spoke on the way. In 50 years of marriage, we had learned to appreciate the silence between us. It was comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that didn't require words. I looked out the window at the houses, shops, and parks passing by, all familiar and yet slightly foreign, as if seen in an old movie. We were driving down Oak Street, where there are several restaurants and cafes, when I noticed a familiar car parked at the curb. A silver Volvo with a distinctive dent in the rear bumper. Noel, I said, grabbing his arm involuntarily. That's Pierce's car. Noel slowed down, looking in the direction I had pointed. Are you sure? There are a lot of cars like that. With that dent? Remember he said someone hit him in the parking lot last month? Noel frowned but said nothing. I understood his doubts. Pierce had canceled our family dinner last night, citing urgent work. What was he doing at a restaurant on a Saturday afternoon? Let's drive by, Noel suggested. Maybe he really is at a business meeting. A business meeting on Saturday at a family restaurant? My voice sounded skeptical. Please stop the car. Noel sighed but obediently parked a few meters away from Pierce's Volvo. Muriel, maybe we shouldn't, he said, sounding worried. What are you going to do? I just want to make sure, I replied, unbuckling my seatbelt. Maybe it's not his car. Or maybe he really does have a business meeting. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I knew what I would see if I walked up to the window of the Olive Branch, a small but rather expensive restaurant serving Mediterranean cuisine. I'll go with you, Noel said, starting to fiddle with his seatbelt. No, stay here, I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. Your knee is bothering you today. I'll just take a quick peek and come right back. He wanted to argue, but then nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of my words. Just don't do anything stupid, okay? When have I ever done anything stupid? I tried to joke, but my smile came out forced. Getting out of the car, I wrapped my raincoat more tightly around me. The rain had almost stopped, but the air was damp and cool. I slowly approached the restaurant, trying to look like a passerby browsing the menu in the window. The Olive Branch was located in an old brick building with large windows facing the street. Inside, it was warm and cozy. Soft lamplight, wooden tables covered with white tablecloths, fresh flowers in small vases. I pretended to study the menu while cautiously scanning the room, and then I saw them. In the far corner, at a large table, sat my son's entire family. Pierce in the light blue shirt I had given him for his birthday, Lorna in an elegant beige dress, Aaron with a new haircut that I had only seen in photos on social media, and Quentin, as usual, buried in his phone. Next to them were Lorna's parents, Osbert and Beryl Elliston, always impeccably dressed and behaving as if they were doing ordinary people the favor of being in their company. They were laughing, all of them. Pierce was telling a story, gesturing animatedly, and the others were laughing, even the usually reserved Osbert. There were wine glasses, plates of food, and bread baskets on the table. A family dinner. The very family dinner that had been canceled because of urgent work. I felt the blood drain from my face. My ears rang, and something in my chest tightened so much that it became difficult to breathe. I stood frozen in place, unable to take my eyes off this picture of family happiness, in which there was no place for Noel and me. How long had this been going on? How often had our family dinners been canceled not because of work, but because they preferred to spend time without us? All those excuses, all those maybe next Saturday, were they just a way to get rid of an obligation that had long since become a burden? I remembered the last time we all got together about a month ago. How Lorna barely hid her irritation when I told her about my job at the factory. How Pierce kept looking at his watch, as if counting down the minutes until we left. How Aaron and Quentin sat with their heads buried in their phones, answering all my questions with one-word answers. And now they were sitting here in a cozy restaurant, laughing, talking, looking happy and relaxed. Without us. Without the two old people who apparently only ruined the atmosphere with their presence. I don't know how long I stood there looking out the window. A minute? 5? 10? Time seemed to stand still, frozen in that moment of realization of the bitter truth. A hand on my shoulder made me flinch. It was Noel. He was standing next to me, leaning on his cane, his face worried. You were gone a long time, I decided to check, he said quietly. Are they there? I nodded, unable to say a word. Noel stood next to me and looked out the window. His face didn't change. Only his lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment pain flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by resignation. Let's go home, Muriel, he said, gently touching my hand. It's cold here and the rain is getting heavier. But I couldn't move. Something inside me broke and at the same time was set free. All the bitterness, all the disappointment, all the years of being politely pushed into the background, it all suddenly boiled up inside me, turning into a determination I hadn't felt in a very long time. No, I said firmly. I want to go in. Noel looked at me with concern. Muriel, think about it. What good will it do? I don't know, I replied honestly, but I have to. He sighed, realizing he couldn't talk me out of it. Do you want me to go with you? I shook my head. No, wait in the car. It won't take long. Noel hesitated, but then nodded. Okay, but don't. He paused, searching for the right words. Don't do anything you'll regret. I won't, I promised, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Noel slowly walked back to the car, and I took a deep breath, gathering my strength, and opened the restaurant door. Inside, it was warm and noisy. Soft music was playing. Waiters were bustling between tables. Patrons were talking and laughing, and glasses and cutlery were clinking. No one paid any attention to the elderly woman in a simple coat who stood uncertainly at the entrance. I slowly made my way across the room, my heart pounding. Each step was difficult, as if I were walking against a strong current, but I kept going, my eyes fixed on the table in the far corner where my family, my own family, was enjoying dinner without me. They noticed me when I was just a few steps away from their table. First, Lorna. She looked up and froze for a moment with her fork in the air, her face expressing astonishment, which quickly turned to annoyance. Then Pierce. He turned, following his wife's gaze, and his smile slowly faded, giving way to an expression I couldn't quite place, a mixture of guilt, irritation, and embarrassment. Aaron and Quentin were the last to notice me. Aaron gasped. Quentin just stared with his mouth open. Lorna's parents exchanged glances, and Beryl raised her eyebrows slightly, a gesture I had seen many times and which always meant silent disapproval. Mom, Pierce broke the awkward silence first, his voice sounding unnaturally high. What are you doing here? I stood there looking at this picture of family happiness from which Noel and I had been completely erased. The table was covered with a snow-white tablecloth, wine glasses, plates with exquisite dishes, flowers in a vase, and smiles that were now frozen on their faces, turning into grimaces of awkwardness. I thought you had urgent work to do, I said calmly, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Pierce faltered, looking helplessly at Lorna as if seeking support. You see, it just happened. We've been planning this dinner with my parents for a long time, Lorna interjected, quickly coming to her husband's aid. They're rarely in town, and we wanted to show them this restaurant. It was a spontaneous decision. Spontaneous, I repeated, looking at Osbert and Beryl, who sat looking as if they were witnessing a particularly unpleasant scene from a bad play. I see. Grandma, Aaron began uncertainly, but I raised my hand to stop her. No need to explain, I said. I was just driving by and saw your car. I thought something might have happened since you weren't at work, like Pierce said. Quentin looked down, suddenly finding something very interesting on his plate. Pierce looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Mom, he began again, we were going to invite you and Dad over next week. Really. It just happened to be today. I looked at all of them. At my son, who couldn't look me in the eye. At my daughter-in-law, who was fidgeting with her napkin in irritation. At my grandchildren, who were embarrassed and indifferent at the same time. At Lorna's parents, who were condescending and arrogant. And suddenly I felt neither pain nor anger, but a strange relief. It was as if I had finally seen the truth that I had refused to acknowledge for so long. I stand frozen in front of the restaurant window, watching them. My family, my blood, and at the same time, complete strangers. The glass separating me from them seems thinner than tissue paper, and at the same time thicker than a fortress wall. They are so close, just a few meters away, and yet infinitely far away. The rain intensifies, drops running down my face, mixing with the unwelcome tears that I don't even try to hold back. I am grateful to the rain for this small mercy. It hides my weakness from casual passers-by. The world around me is blurring, but the picture outside the window remains crystal clear, as if engraved on my retina. Pierce is sitting back in his chair, with a glass of red wine in his hand. His gesture, his posture, everything about him speaks of relaxation and comfort. When he was little, he used to lean back in his chair at our kitchen table just like that, and I always told him off. Pierce, sit up straight, you'll ruin your posture. Now I see that boy in him, but at the same time he's a complete stranger to me. Lorna is next to him, flawless as always. Her hair is perfectly styled, her makeup is flawless, and her pearl earrings sparkle in the soft light of the restaurant lamps. She is laughing at something her father said, and her laughter seems fake even through the glass. Or maybe that's just my bias. Maybe she's sincere with them and only fake with me. I remember the day Pierce first brought her home to meet us. It was 23 years ago in early spring. She was wearing a light blue dress and low-heeled shoes. She smiled, praised my rhubarb pie, asked polite questions about my work. And then, when Pierce left the room, she looked around our living room with a barely perceptible expression of superiority. I remember how she glanced at our old furniture, at the photographs on the walls, at the bookshelves filled with technical manuals and science fiction books that Noel loved. I saw judgment in her eyes. Our house, our life, and we ourselves were not good enough. But Pierce was in love, and we wanted him to be happy. So I smiled and pretended not to notice her condescension. I hoped that over time she would see us for who we really were, that she would realize we had more to offer her than just a comfortable home and a steady income, which her parents were so proud of. But that didn't happen. Right after the wedding, things started to change. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible. Pierce started calling less often. Our Sunday dinners became monthly. Then the grandchildren came, and I hoped that would bring us closer together, give us a new point of contact. But Lorna made it clear from the start that they had a nanny, that the children had a schedule, and that our offers to help were nice but not necessary. Now I watch my grandchildren through the restaurant window. Erin is 19, a beautiful girl with Pierce's dark hair and Lorna's delicate features. Quentin, at 16, is already taller than his father, lanky and awkward like all teenagers that age. They both stare at their phones, only looking up occasionally to answer a question or get more food. Quentin. I remember him as a little boy with wide eyes and 1,000 questions. Grandma, is it true that lightning is electricity? Why do light bulbs glow? Can you really fix TVs? He would sit on my lap while I explained the simplest laws of physics in terms a 5-year-old could understand. He had the same spark of curiosity that I saw in Pierce as a child, which I always associated with a technical mind. When he turned 8, I gave him a junior electronics kit, a safe one with batteries instead of mains power. Lorna grimaced when he unwrapped it. Mom, is that really an appropriate gift for a child? It's dangerous. I tried to explain that the kit was completely safe, that I had checked every component myself, that I would be there when he played with it. But she just shook her head, and a week later gave him a new video game that completely captured his attention. After that incident, I began to notice how Lorna systematically discouraged any influence Noel and I might have on our grandchildren. Our gifts were politely accepted and then quietly disappeared. Our offers to spend time with the children were declined under various pretexts. Our invitations for tea or weekend visits were met with polite refusals. Gradually, we were pushed to the periphery of our grandchildren's lives. We became a mandatory event, once a month, 2 hours, no more. Routine questions, routine answers, no real connection. Now, watching them through the glass, I see Quentin showing Erin something on his phone, and they're both laughing. He has the same smile as Pierce did at his age, a little crooked, with a dimple on his left cheek. I haven't seen that smile directed at me in many years. And here are Lorna's parents, Osbert and Beryl Elliston. They sit up straight, with perfect posture that seems unnatural for people their age. They've always struck me as mannequins taken out of an expensive store window, impeccably dressed, with measured gestures and expressions, but without a shred of genuine warmth. Osbert once owned a chain of small appliance stores. He loved to mention this at every meeting, as if expecting me, as an electrical engineer, to be impressed. We sold the best Japanese televisions in Birmingham, he would say proudly. As if reselling someone else's products was somehow more worthy than creating your own devices than the work I had dedicated my life to. Beryl had never worked. She was a housewife, as she proudly called herself, although they always had a live-in housekeeper. Her main occupation, as far as I could tell, was maintaining a certain lifestyle, the right shops, the right restaurants, the right friends. She looked at my hands, the hands of an engineer with short nails and small scars from a soldering iron, with ill-concealed horror. They never accepted us as equals. To them, we were always a little lower on the social ladder. Noel, the mechanic, and me, the woman who worked in a factory. It didn't matter that I had worked my way up to a management position, that my designs were used in equipment across the country. To them, it was just factory work. When Pierce and Lorna got married, Beryl said to me at the wedding, with that special look of sympathy that is actually disguised contempt, "You must be so proud that your son is marrying a girl from such a good family." I remember clenching my teeth and smiling, thinking that my family was no worse than theirs. We may not have been as wealthy, but we were honest, hardworking people who loved our son and gave him everything we could. Now, looking at them through the restaurant window, I see them forming a small, closed circle from which Noel and I are excluded. They look like the perfect family from an advertisement: beautiful, smiling, carefree. And I know that behind this picture, there are many unspoken words, unlived emotions, unresolved conflicts. But on the surface, there is only a perfect veneer. I remember how we were gradually excluded from more and more family events. At first, it was little things: Aaron's friend's birthday party, to which only the closest friends were invited; a weekend trip to Lorna's parents' country house, where, unfortunately, there wasn't enough room for everyone. Then came the more significant events: Christmas, which they preferred to spend just with their little family; Pierce's birthday, to which we were invited only for tea, not for the main celebration. The most painful for me was Noel's last anniversary, his 70th birthday. We had planned a small family celebration. I ordered his favorite cake and prepared a special dinner. Pierce called 2 hours before the appointed time. "I'm sorry, Dad, but Quentin has an unexpected rehearsal with the school orchestra, and Lorna promised to take Aaron to her friend's house. Maybe we can stop by for half an hour tomorrow?" I remember the look on Noel's face when I told him the news. He just nodded and said, "Of course they have their own lives," but I could see the pain in his eyes, the pain he was trying to hide behind a mask of indifference. We ate the cake together, watching an old movie on TV, pretending that it was enough, that we didn't feel the emptiness in the house that had once been filled with laughter and conversation. Since then, I've learned not to expect much, to accept what we are given with gratitude, without asking for more, to convince myself that they really do have busy lives, that they really can't spare more time for us, that it's not that they don't want to be with us. But now, standing in the rain outside the restaurant window, I can no longer maintain this illusion. Here they are, not busy with work, not torn between commitments, just enjoying a family dinner, without us. Because we are not part of their family, not really. We are an obligation, a burden to be endured out of a sense of duty, but one that can easily be discarded under any convenient pretext. The rain is getting heavier, but I hardly notice it. I watch as Pierce leans toward Lorna, whispers something in her ear, and she laughs, sincerely, with a warmth I've never seen directed at me. I watch as Osbert pats Quentin on the shoulder with a pride that should have been my privilege. I watch Beryl fix Aaron's hair with a gesture full of tenderness I could never allow myself. And suddenly, I am overcome by a feeling I cannot immediately identify. It is not anger, resentment, or bitterness, although all of those are present as well. It's something deeper, more fundamental. It's realization. The realization that all these years I've been clinging to an illusion, to a hope that was never meant to be. I allowed myself to be pushed into the background, to become invisible, to turn into a shadow on the periphery of their lives. And for what? To be able to see my grandchildren who barely know me from time to time? To maintain a relationship with a son who prefers the company of other people? To not disrupt a fragile peace that is not really peace at all, but merely the absence of honest conversation? Suddenly, I feel a hand on my shoulder. It's Noel. He's standing next to me, hunched over in the rain, his face worried. "Muriel, you're soaking wet," he says quietly. "Let's go home." I look at him, my husband, my life partner, the man who has been by my side for 50 years through joy and sorrow, wealth and poverty, sickness and health. He knows what I see and understands what I feel without a single word. In his eyes, I see the same pain, the same awareness, but also a humility that I don't feel. "I need to go in," I say, surprised at the firmness of my voice. "Why?" he asks, but it's not an objection, it's a sincere question. What difference will it make? I don't know the answer. I don't know what I'll say to them, what I'll do. I only know that I can no longer stand here behind the glass, watching the life I've been excluded from. I don't know. I answer honestly, but I have to. Noel looks at me for a long time, intently, as if trying to read my thoughts. Then he slowly nods. Do you want me to go with you? He asks, and I hear in his voice a willingness to support me despite his own doubts. I shake my head. No, wait in the car, I won't be long. He hesitates, but then agrees. Just don't do anything you'll regret, he says, and I see the worry in his eyes. I won't, I promise, though I'm not sure I can keep that promise. Noel reluctantly leaves, looking back at me several times before getting into the car. I stand alone in front of the restaurant, rain running down my face, but I no longer feel cold. Inside me, a determination grows, firm, unshakable, like the steel I've worked with all my life. I take a deep breath and grab the door handle. The warm air of the restaurant envelops me as I open the door. After the cold rain, it feels almost stuffy in here. The smells of food, olive oil, freshly baked bread, rosemary, and garlic instantly surround me. Soft music, the clinking of cutlery, and muffled conversations create a cozy backdrop. The contrast with my inner state couldn't be more striking. I pause for a moment, allowing my eyes to adjust to the lighting and gathering my thoughts. No one pays any attention to me, just an elderly woman, wet from the rain, with drops of water dripping from her raincoat onto the wooden floor. I take a deep breath and make my way across the room to the corner table where my family is sitting. They still haven't noticed me. Pierce is talking animatedly, gesturing wildly. Lorna is looking at him with that special smile I've never seen directed at me, a mixture of tenderness and pride. The grandchildren are absorbed in their phones, only occasionally looking up. Lorna's parents listen to Pierce with polite interest. I move closer, and that's when they start to notice me. Lorna is the first. Her gaze happens to fall in my direction, and I see her expression change. First, confusion. Who is this old woman heading toward their table? Then recognition, and with it a whole range of emotions: surprise, alarm, irritation, and finally, carefully rehearsed politeness. Muriel, she says, her voice higher than usual. Pierce breaks off his story mid-sentence and turns around. His face pales, and I see in his eyes what hurts my heart the most: fear. My own son is afraid of me, or rather, afraid of the awkward situation my appearance has created. Mom? His voice sounds unnatural, as if he's trying to speak with his mouth full. How did you get here? By this point, I'm standing at their table. All eyes are on me. Osbert and Beryl exchange quick glances. I see a mixture of disapproval and curiosity in them. Erin finally looks up from her phone and looks at me with an expression of teenage embarrassment. Quentin just freezes, his large eyes, so similar to Pierce's when he was a child, widen in surprise. Hello, I say, my voice sounding calmer than I expected. I didn't mean to interrupt. An awkward silence ensues. No one knows what to say. No one invites me to sit down, asks how I ended up here, expresses any joy at seeing me. Just stunned looks, as if a ghost has appeared at their perfect family dinner. Are you alone? Pierce finally asks, and I hear in his voice the hope that Noel isn't with me, that the awkwardness can be limited in some way. Noel is waiting in the car, I reply. We were just driving by and decided to stop in downtown. We haven't been out in a while. Oh, Pierce runs his hand nervously through his hair, a gesture I've known since he was a child. He always did that when he was caught lying. You see, it just happened. We suddenly had some free time and decided to have lunch together, Lorna interjects, her voice sounding confident and smooth, like a well-rehearsed line. It was a spontaneous decision. My parents are visiting, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity to see them. I see, I nod, looking at Osbert and Beryl, who are sitting like spectators in a theater watching a particularly dramatic scene. We were going to call you tomorrow, Lorna continues, and I hear a slight hint of irritation in her voice, to suggest we meet up next weekend. How nice of you, I reply, my voice sounding colder than I intended. Beryl clears her throat and addresses me in that special condescending tone she always reserves for me. Muriel, you look wet. It must be pouring outside. It's her way of reminding me that I've disrupted their idyll, that I don't belong here. Old, wet, out of place. The rain is getting heavier, I agree, but it's no big deal. Grandma, Erin says unexpectedly, her tone unnaturally cheerful. Would you like to join us? We can ask for another chair. I look at her and see that the offer is not sincere. It's just a display of good manners she's been taught. Her eyes say something completely different. Please decline. No, thank you, dear, I reply. Grandpa and I have already had lunch. It's a blatant lie, but no one questions it. Everyone relaxes almost imperceptibly. The crisis has passed. They won't have to share their table with us. How's school? I ask Erin, trying to make the conversation less tense. Fine, she shrugs. Lots of work. And your music, Quentin? I turn to my grandson. Are you still playing the saxophone? Quentin blushes and mumbles. Yes, sometimes. He's in the school orchestra, Pierce says proudly, as if trying to smooth over the awkwardness. He had a concert recently. It went very well. You didn't invite us, I remark quietly. Another awkward silence. Pierce and Lorna exchange quick glances. It was last minute, Lorna says. We only found out the day before. We thought it would be difficult for you to get to the school in the evening. Always the same excuses. Always concerned about our convenience, which is really just a way of keeping us at a distance. We could have taken a taxi, I say, knowing it's pointless. That there's no point in arguing about the past. That I didn't really come here for that. Osbert clears his throat and joins the conversation. Muriel, I recently read an interesting article about new technologies in electronics. Something about quantum processors. Probably not at all what you were working on. It's his way of showing that he remembers my profession, but at the same time emphasizing that my knowledge is outdated, that I belong to the past. I don't fall for this trick. I read modern electronics magazines, I reply. Technology changes, but the basic principles remain the same. Beryl wrinkles her nose slightly, as if the very idea that a woman my age is interested in such things seems indecent to her. These days, young people are so obsessed with all these gadgets, she says, glancing at her grandchildren with their phones. I think real communication is much more important. The irony of the moment does not escape me. Beryl is talking about the value of live communication while sitting at a table with a family that systematically excludes us from their lives. Pierce looks increasingly nervous. He keeps glancing at his watch as if trying to find a way to delicately end this awkward situation. Mom, he finally says, maybe you'd like us to drive you and Dad home? It's raining hard and you must be tired. There it is. A polite suggestion that is really a request to leave. You must be tired is a euphemism for you're old and weak, you don't belong here. I look at them all. At my son, whom I raised with love, who now looks at me with barely concealed impatience. At his wife, who never considered me worthy of her respect. At their children, my grandchildren, who barely know me. At Lorna's parents, who always considered Noel and me second-class citizens. And suddenly, all the pain, all the disappointment, all the bitterness I've held back for years rises up in me. But it's not uncontrollable anger. It's a clear, crystal clear awareness of the situation. I see right through them. I see their insincerity, their petty tricks, their carefully maintained illusion of family unity, which in reality excludes us. I see how they cling to their little privileges, their status, their illusion of superiority. I see how my own son has betrayed not only Noel and me, but also himself. The curious, sincere boy he once was. I could make a scene. I could tell them everything that has built up over the years. I could cry, scream, accuse, but I know it won't bring any relief. It will only confirm their opinion of me as an unstable old woman who doesn't know her place. Instead, I straighten up, square my shoulders, and say quietly but clearly, don't worry, Pierce. Noel and I will be fine. We've always managed on our own. It's a simple sentence. There is no accusation, no anger, no reproach. And yet I can see how it hits its mark. I see Pierce flinch, Lorna tense, Beryl and Osbert exchange quick glances. Even Erin and Quentin look up from their phones, sensing the unexpected weight of the moment. We've always managed on our own. Those words sum up the entire history of our relationship. The entire history of how they distanced themselves from us. How they left us alone with our old age, our problems, our loneliness. How they pretended to care about us when in reality they were just fulfilling their minimum social obligations. I see a sudden realization in Pierce's eyes. I see him realizing the depth of his betrayal. Not a loud, dramatic betrayal, but a quiet, everyday one, made up of small refusals, little lies, small evasions. Mom, he begins, and there is something like remorse in his voice. We didn't mean to, but I've already turned away. I don't need his apologies. I don't need explanations or excuses. I said what I wanted to say. One sentence that says more than 1,000 words. I walk toward the exit, feeling their eyes on my back. I don't turn around. I don't wave goodbye. I just leave with the dignity they couldn't take away from me. Stepping outside, I take a deep breath of the damp air. It's still raining, but it seems lighter. Or maybe it's just me feeling lighter. It's as if the weight I've been carrying for years, the weight of unfulfilled hopes, unacknowledged pain, unspoken truths, has finally fallen from my shoulders. I walk to the car where Noel is waiting. He looks at me through the wet glass with concern and a question in his eyes. I sit down next to him, shaking the raindrops off my raincoat. "Are you okay?" he asks quietly. "Yes," I reply, and for the first time in a long time, it's not a lie. "Everything's fine now." Noel doesn't ask any more questions. He knows me well enough to understand that I'll tell him when I'm ready. He just nods and starts the car. We drive home in silence, but it's not a heavy silence full of unspoken words and suppressed emotions. It's a calm silence, a silence of understanding and acceptance. I look out the window at the city passing by, at the houses and shops, at the people hurrying under their umbrellas, at the raindrops running down the glass. And for the first time in a long time, I feel not bitterness, not resentment, not disappointment, but a strange calmness. The calmness of a person who has finally told the truth, not loudly, not dramatically, but no less convincingly for that. We've always managed on our own. This is not just a statement of fact, it is a declaration of independence. It is an acknowledgement of the reality of our relationship. It is a liberation from illusions and false hopes. And perhaps it is the beginning of something new. Something based not on obligations and guilt, but on honesty and mutual respect. Or maybe it's the end. A calm, dignified acknowledgement that some bonds cannot be repaired, that some wounds are too deep to heal. I don't know how Pierce will react. Will he call with an apology, try to justify himself, or just pretend nothing happened? I don't know if anything will change in our relationship after this day. But I do know one thing. I will no longer live in the shadow of expectations that will never be fulfilled. I will no longer pretend that I'm okay with being invisible, with being convenient only when it doesn't interfere with their plans. Noel glances at me, and I see understanding in his eyes. He has always understood me better than anyone else. He silently reaches out and squeezes my hand, a gesture of support, a gesture of solidarity. We are in this together, just as we have been in everything else. The rain begins to ease as we pull up to the house. Noel stops the car, and we sit for a while, just looking at the little house we've shared all these years. It's not perfect. It's aging with us, needing repairs, care, attention, but it's ours. Our refuge, our fortress. "Home?" Noel asks. "Home," I reply, and in that word is all my humility and all my strength. The next morning was surprisingly clear. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating patterns on the bedroom wall. I woke up earlier than usual and lay there for a while, watching the play of light and shadow. Noel was snoring quietly beside me, his face looking younger and calmer in his sleep, without the lines of worry that appeared when he was awake. The events of the previous day seemed almost unreal, like a scene from a movie I had once seen. The restaurant, the faces of my family, their awkward excuses, my quiet words before I left. It was as if it had all happened to someone else, not me. And yet I felt a change inside me, as if something that had been held back for a long time had finally broken free. When we got home yesterday, Noel and I hardly spoke. He didn't ask what had happened at the restaurant, and I wasn't in a hurry to tell him. We just went about our usual evening routine, had dinner, watched TV, got ready for bed. But something had changed in the atmosphere between us. There was a new understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the truth that we both knew but avoided voicing. Noel woke up and turned to me, blinking sleepily. "Good morning," he said in a voice hoarse from sleep. "You're up early." "Good morning," I replied. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded, sitting up slowly and wincing from the pain in his joints.
You?
"Better than I expected," I replied honestly. We had breakfast in the kitchen, bathed in morning sunlight. Toast, eggs, tea, everything was as usual, but at the same time something had changed, something intangible. I felt a strange lightness, as if I had taken off a heavy backpack I had been carrying for years. Do you want to talk about yesterday? Noel finally asked, pushing his empty plate away. I hesitated. Did I want to? Part of me wanted to leave things as they were, not stir up painful feelings. But another part of me understood that we couldn't just pretend nothing had happened. I only said one thing to them, I began. That we've always managed on our own. Noel looked at me intently, waiting for me to continue. And it's true, I continued. We've always managed on our own. When Pierce was little and you worked overtime to make ends meet. When I juggled factory work and housework. When we saved every penny to pay for his education. We managed. We managed, Noel agreed quietly. And now they act like we're a burden. Like we're incapable of taking care of ourselves. Like we need their condescending charity. I felt the bitterness rising in me again, but now it wasn't as sharp as before. They cancel appointments with us. They lie to us. They exclude us from their lives. And they pretend they're doing it out of concern for us. Noel sighed and placed his hand on mine. People change, Muriel. Pierce didn't turn out the way we hoped he would. It's painful, but it's the reality. We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The phone rang, making us both jump. I looked at Noel and he nodded, getting up to answer. Hello, he said, and then his face changed. Ah, Pierce, good morning. I tensed. Pierce never called us this early. Noel listened, nodding occasionally, though his caller couldn't see him. Yes, she's here. I'll put her on, he said, handing me the phone with an unreadable expression on his face. Hi, Pierce, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom! His voice sounded tense, as if he was carefully choosing his words. I'm calling to apologize for yesterday. We should have been more honest with you. I waited, not answering. The words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced them beforehand. You see, he continued after a pause, we really have a lot going on. Work, kids. All these commitments. We didn't mean to hurt you. It's just that sometimes it's easier to simplify things. Simplify, I repeated. You mean lie? No, he hastily objected. It's just sometimes we're really busy and sometimes, well, we have a right to our own lives, to see our friends or Lorna's parents. Of course, I agreed calmly. You have every right to do that. So you're not angry? His voice sounded relieved, which showed me that he hadn't understood the essence of the problem at all. I'm not angry, Pierce, I said honestly. I just see things as they are. What do you mean? His tone became wary again. I mean, you shouldn't feel obligated to spend time with us if you don't want to. My father and I understand perfectly well that you have your own life. But we want to spend time with you, he objected, but his voice sounded uncertain. It's just hard sometimes. Then let's make it easier, I suggested. No mandatory monthly dinners, no sense of obligation. We'll see each other when we really want to, not because we're supposed to. There was a long pause. I could almost hear his brain working, trying to figure out if this was a trap or a release. Are you sure? He finally asked. Absolutely, I replied. Your father and I will be fine. We always have been. Another pause. Okay, he said finally. But we still want to see you. Maybe not every month, but... Of course, I interrupted him gently. Whenever you want, no strings attached. We ended the conversation with the usual pleasantries. Pierce sounded a little confused, as if he wasn't sure what had just happened. I hung up and looked at Noel, who was watching me intently. You let him go, he said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, I agreed. I let him go. We spent the day doing our usual things. I worked in the garden. Noel fiddled with the radio he'd been trying to fix for weeks. But something had changed. It was as if a heavy cloud that had been hanging over us had finally dissipated, allowing the sun to shine into our lives. After dinner, we were sitting in the living room when Noel suddenly said, I think we should accept Malcolm's invitation. I looked at him in surprise. The invitation to a reunion of former factory colleagues, which we had discussed a few days earlier, had almost slipped my mind after everything that had happened. Do you really want to go? Noel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Yes, I think I do. I haven't seen my old friends in a long time. And it will be good for you to meet people who remember you not just as someone's mother or grandmother, but as an engineer, a specialist. I felt warmth spreading inside me. Noel always understood me better than anyone else. Okay, I agreed. I'll call Malcolm tomorrow and tell him we're coming. Noel nodded, then after a short pause added, I've been thinking about something else. What? I asked, intrigued by the seriousness of his tone. About moving. I stared at him in amazement. Moving? Where? To Shropshire, he replied, watching my reaction. Remember when we went there last year? You liked it. I remembered. A small town in the countryside, green hills, a quiet pace of life. We spent a week there in a small cottage we rented for the vacation. That was before Noel's arthritis started to bother him. That's quite far from Birmingham, I remarked cautiously. About 100 miles. Noel nodded. Far enough to start a new life, but not so far that we'd lose touch with the old one. I thought about it. The idea of moving had never occurred to me before. We had lived in this house for over 30 years. Pierce had grown up here. We had experienced joys and sorrows here. Every corner held memories. Why now? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Because now we are free, Noel replied simply. Free from expectations, from disappointments, from illusions. Free to do what we want, not what we think we should. I pondered his words. There was something liberating about the idea of starting over, in a place where no one knew us, where there was no history of disappointment and hurt. You've been thinking about this seriously, I remarked. Yes, he admitted. For some time now, but until yesterday it seemed impossible. We were tied here, by commitments that existed only in our imagination. I knew he was right. We held on to this house, to this life, because Pierce was here. Our grandchildren were here. Even when it became clear that we weren't the center of their lives, we still clung to the opportunity to be close, to be available, to be needed. What if they want to visit us? I asked, knowing it was a weak argument. Then they'll get in the car and come over, Noel replied with a slight smile. Like I said, it's not that far. We talked late into the night, discussing possibilities, plans, dreams that seemed buried under the weight of everyday worries and disappointments. Something awakened in both of us, a spirit of adventure that seemed to have long since died. The next day, I called Malcolm and confirmed that we would attend the alumni gathering. He was delighted and mentioned that many people had asked about me and were interested in how my life had turned out after retirement. Helena Butler will be there, he said, and I smiled at the mention of my old friend, with whom I had lost touch several years ago. She now lives in Shropshire, in a small town called Ludlow. She says it's the perfect place for retirees, quiet, beautiful, and with all the amenities you need. I froze when I heard the name of the town. Ludlow. That was where Noel and I had spent our vacation last year. Coincidence or a sign? Malcolm, I said slowly. Do you know if there are any houses or apartments for rent there? He was surprised by my question, but replied that Helena had recently mentioned several cottages for sale in her neighborhood. Are you and Noel thinking of moving? He asked in surprise. Maybe, I replied. We've just started discussing the idea. That evening, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Quentin standing on the doorstep, shifting from foot to foot. Hi, Grandma, he said awkwardly. Can I come in? I was so surprised that I just stepped back silently, letting him into the house. Quentin had never come to our house alone, without his parents. Is Grandpa home? He asked as he walked into the living room. He's in the garage working on his radio, I replied, still stunned by his appearance. I'll call him. No, don't, he said quickly. I actually wanted to talk to you. We sat down in the living room, and I noticed with surprise that Quentin had left his phone in his pocket instead of taking it out, as he usually did at every opportunity. He faltered, clearly not knowing how to begin. I wanted to apologize for yesterday, for the restaurant. I looked at him closely. His face showed genuine embarrassment, not the polite mask I had grown accustomed to seeing in recent years. You don't have to apologize, Quentin, I said softly. It wasn't your fault. But I was part of it, he objected. I sat there with my phone, pretending you didn't exist, and not just yesterday, always. I was struck by his insight. At 16, he saw the situation more clearly than his parents did. Why did you come now? I asked. He paused, gathering his thoughts. After you left, everyone acted like nothing had happened. They kept eating and talking as if it was normal, that you showed up and were deceived. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what you said, that you always managed on your own. He looked up at me and I saw something new in his eyes, understanding, compassion I hadn't expected. And I thought about how many times we canceled our meetings, how many times I pretended I wasn't interested in your stories about work, when in fact, they were always interesting. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want to embarrass him even more. "Thank you, Quentin," I said quietly. "That means a lot to me." He nodded, then asked unexpectedly, "Can you tell me more? About your work, what you did?" And I told him. About my first days at the factory, when there were few female engineers and I had to prove my competence every day. About the projects I worked on, the diagrams I drew, the problems I solved. About how electronics had changed over the years I had been working there, from tube devices to microchips. Quentin listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really trying to understand. At one point, Noel joined us, having returned from the garage, and the conversation became even more lively. When Quentin finally got ready to leave, it was already dark. He promised to come back, maybe next weekend, if that was convenient. "Sure," I said. "We'd love to have you back." After he left, Noel and I sat in silence, thinking about the unexpected turn of events. "Do you still want to move?" Noel asked. "Now that Quentin seems to want to rebuild our relationship?" I thought about it. My grandson's visit had touched me and given me hope that all was not lost. But at the same time, I knew it was only a small step that didn't change the big picture. "Yes," I finally replied. "I still want to. If Quentin really wants to be in touch, 100 miles won't stop him. And if it was just a moment of temporary remorse, well, then I'm glad we had this evening." Noel nodded, understanding my logic. "Then let's get serious about this," he said. "Let's see what kind of cottages Helena mentioned. Maybe we can go to Ladlow and check them out." I smiled, feeling a warm glow of anticipation spread through me. Starting over at 74, it sounded crazy, and at the same time, it felt right. That night, I lay awake for a long time, thinking about the events of the past few days. About how one moment of truth in a restaurant had set off a chain of changes that could completely transform our lives. About how the painful process of letting go of illusions had opened the door to new possibilities. I didn't know what the future would bring. Would we really move to Ladlow? Would things work out with Quentin? How would Pierce react to our possible move? But I knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, I was looking ahead with hope instead of anxiety. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny, rather than a passive observer of other people's lives. I turned to Noel, who was already asleep, his face looking peaceful in the moonlight. 50 years together. So many stories. So many memories. So much love. And perhaps many more years ahead of us. Years that we will live in our own way, on our own terms. "We've always managed on our own," I thought as I fell asleep. And it wasn't a bitter observation, but a proud statement. We managed. And we will continue to manage. Together.